The balloon left his hand at 11 on a bright, ordinary morning, and for the length of one heartbeat, the whole forecourt held its breath to watch it fly. I saw it come. I was standing 4 paces to the left of Corwin Vale, in the shade of the north pillar, my own rifle at rest, and my eyes doing the work they always did on a crowd that size, reading hands, reading shoulders, reading the small tells that tell a man of my trade when a morning is about to stop being ordinary. I had clocked the young one 20 minutes before he threw anything. You learned to. He was the loud one, the one who kept turning his back to the gates, so the little glowing rectangle in his hand could catch his own grinning face against ours. He had a ring light clipped to the top of the phone and a friend beside him holding a second phone at a lower angle, and between them they had built themselves a small stage on the public side of the barrier, the way certain young men do now, treating the king's forecourt as a set and the man on the plinth as a prop. The balloon was red. I remember the red of it because it was almost the exact red of Corwin's tunic, as if the boy had chosen the color to make the joke land harder, guard red water bursting on guard red wool, and I remember thinking, in that stretched half-second, he has practiced this in his head 100 times, and he has never once imagined it going the way it is about to go. It struck Corwin Vale on the right shoulder, high, just below the collar, and it burst. Water sheeted down the front of his tunic in a dark, spreading stain. It ran off the polished brim of nothing, because he wore the bearskin and the water went into the fur of it and down the back of his neck under the chin strap, and a rope of it slid down the barrel of his rifle and dripped off the muzzle onto the cobbles. A fine spray of it caught the sun and hung there for an instant like a thing thrown up by a wave. And Corwin Vale did not move. I want to be precise about this, because in the days that followed a great many people described what they had seen, and most of them described it wrong. They said he was frozen. He was not frozen. Frozen is what a rabbit does. Frozen is fear holding a body still. What Corwin did was the opposite of that, and if you have never stood a post yourself, you may not understand the difference, so let me try to make you understand it, because the whole of what happened next turns on it. A frozen man is a man overtaken. Corwin was a man in command of himself first, before anything else. His eyes did not so much as flick to the boy. His jaw did not tighten. The water ran into his eyes and he let it run, and he did not blink it away like an ordinary man flinching from wet. He closed his eyes once slowly, the way you close them against strong sun, and opened them again, and they were forward level, fixed on the far pillar exactly where they had been fixed the moment before. His breathing did not change. I was close enough to see the pulse in his throat, and it did not so much as stutter. The rifle stayed at the order, butt on the stone, and his white-gloved hand, soaked now, the glove gone gray-dark and heavy with water, stayed exactly where it belonged on the barrel, fingers together, thumb along the seam. He stood in his ruined uniform, dripping, and he was more immovable wet than he had been dry. The crowd made a sound, not a scream, a strange collective intake, the sound 100 people make when a thing that is not supposed to happen happens in front of them all at once. And into the middle of that sound came the boy's laugh. I have heard a great many bad sounds across my years on this forecourt. I have heard a woman scream that her son was under a horse. I have heard the flat crack of a thing that turned out to be a car backfiring, and for 3 seconds was the worst sound in the world. But I am not sure I have ever heard a sound I liked less than that boy's laugh in that moment, because it was a laugh of pure, glittering triumph, the laugh of someone who believes he has just done something clever and brave, and is about to be rewarded for it by every screen in the world. "He didn't move," the boy shouted, spinning to his phone, spinning back, his whole face lit up. Bro, he didn't even move. Did you get that? Tell me you got that." Got it," said the friend, low, and there was a thinner note in the friend's voice, a note the boy did not hear because he was too full of himself to hear anything but his own heart. The friend had felt the crowd sound change. The friend had begun, dimly, to understand that the two of them were now standing at the center of a great many eyes, and that not one pair of those eyes was laughing. The boy did not understand it. That was his whole undoing, and it was already written, in that first instant, plain as a signature. He mistook the silence around him for awe. He thought the crowd had gone quiet because they were amazed at him. He was, I would learn, 19 years old, and he had a following of some 400,000 strangers who had taught him that the correct response to any human being's discomfort was to point a camera at it and laugh. And he had come to this forecourt that morning believing, with his whole chest, that the man on the plinth was the same kind of thing as a locked door you kick to see if it opens. An object placed in the world for him to test. My name does not matter much to this story, but you should know who is telling it to you, so I will tell you. I am the sergeant of that post. I have stood on that forecourt, or near it, in one uniform or another for the better part of 22 years, and I have trained more young guardsmen than I can name, and I trained Corwin Vale. He came to me 4 years ago as a raw thing, a farm boy with good bones and a temper he did not yet know he had, and I spent the better part of 2 years teaching him that his stillness was not a punishment laid on him but a weapon given to him, and that the day would come, it always comes, when someone would try to make him break, and that on that day his refusal would be the loudest thing in the square. I did not know, when I taught him that I would one day watch it proved in front of the entire watching world. But that is what I watched. So let me tell it properly from the beginning of that morning, so you understand not only what the boy did, but what he did it to, and why the ground opened under him so fast. The morning had begun the way 1,000 mornings begin. Cool at the changing, the stone still holding the night's chill, the first tour buses grinding up the approach road while the light was still gray. By 9:30 the forecourt beyond the railings was filling, the ordinary river of it, families with folding maps, an old couple who came every week and stood at the same spot by the west gate, a school group in matching caps being counted and recounted by a harried teacher, a scattering of the phone people who came now in ever greater numbers, not to see the guard but to be seen near him. I want to be fair about the phone people, because it would be easy in a story like this to make them all villains, and they are not. Most of them are harmless. Most of them film for a minute, say something to their own faces, and drift on to the next thing, and no one is the worse for it. A guard learns to let it wash over him the way he lets the weather wash over him. Corwin was very good at that. He had a gift, in fact, for making people feel foolish about the phones without ever moving a muscle. There is a kind of dignity so complete that it makes the camera pointed at it look small, and Corwin had it. I had watched grown men lower their phones and step back from him with something like shame, having intended only mockery, and found, to their surprise, that they could not sustain it in the face of a man who so plainly did not care. The boy was not like that. The boy had come with a plan. I had marked him early, as I said. There is a difference between a man filming and a man staging, and I read it in him the moment his group arrived a little after 10:30. They came in loud. 3 of them at first, the loud one, the friend with the second phone, and a third who peeled off almost at once and stationed himself further along the rail with yet another phone, so that whatever was going to happen would be caught from 3 angles. That is not how tourists behave. That is a production. When I saw the third one take up his mark, I felt the small, cold drop in the stomach that 22 years gives you, the one that says something is coming, and you do not yet know its shape, so watch. So I watched. I signaled Denby at the guard hut by the inner arch, with the flat of my hand held low and turned, the sign that means asterisk eyes on that group, no move yet. Denby is not a ceremonial man. Denby wears a plain dark suit and an earpiece and a manner so mild you would take him for a museum attendant, and Denby is one of the most dangerous men I know, in the good sense, the sense that means when a thing goes wrong on this forecourt, Denby, and the men who answer to him are the reason it goes wrong in the space of a breath. Denby saw my signal. Denby's chin dipped a 1/4 inch. Somewhere behind the arch, without anyone in the crowd knowing it, a machine began very quietly to turn. This is the part the boy did not know and could not have known, and it is the whole hinge of the morning. When he looked at Corwin Vale, he saw a single man, a statue in a red coat, alone on a stone, forbidden by his own rules from lifting a hand against a 19-year-old with a water balloon. And in one narrow sense the boy was right. Corwin was forbidden, and Corwin would not lift a hand, and the boy had correctly understood that he could strike this man and the man would not strike back. What the boy had not understood was that Corwin's stillness was not weakness, and it was not the whole of the defense. Corwin was the visible edge of a thing that went back a long way into the shadow of the arch, Denby and his people, and the barrier line, and the protocols written in the aftermath of older, worse mornings than this one. And behind all of that the plain and unglamorous fact that the forecourt of the king's house is not a stage the public may do as it likes upon, but a working post, watched, ruled, and answerable. The boy thought he was testing whether the statue would flinch. He was not. He was testing whether the law that surrounded the statue was real. And it was very real, and it was already, quietly in motion, and he had perhaps 90 seconds left of the life he had walked in with, though he stood there grinning as if he had all the time in the world. Let me take you back to the barrier, to the minutes before the throw, so you can see it build. The boy's name, it was said everywhere within a day, but I will not honor it here, so I will call him what the crowd came to call him. The balloon boy warmed up on smaller things first. That is how these performances go. He started by leaning over the rope and shouting at Corwin. Say something. Come on, say one word, and I'll leave you alone. Corwin, of course, said nothing, and the boy played that nothing to his phone as if it were a triumph, narrating his own bravery. He's not allowed to talk to me. He literally can't do anything. Watch. Then he tried faces, crossing his eyes, mugging, doing the little dance that means nothing except look at me. Corwin's gaze went through him to the far pillar as though he were a pane of glass. I watched the boy's frustration build under the performance, and this is a thing I have seen 100 times, and it is always the same, and it is always dangerous. When a man sets out to get a reaction and the reaction does not come, he does not, as you might hope, grow bored and leave. He escalates. The wall of the other man's calm becomes an insult he must answer. Each thing that fails to move Corwin was, to the boy, a small humiliation delivered in front of 400,000 strangers, and a boy like that cannot bear a small humiliation. He must cover it with a bigger swing. So the faces became shouts, and the shouts became a lunge across the rope to wave a hand an inch from Corwin's eyes. Corwin did not blink, and I saw Denby's men drift a half-step closer along the inner line, unhurried, invisible, and I saw the friend with the second phone glance nervously at the crowd, and I saw the boy reach down into the bag at his feet. And I knew, the way you know weather, that whatever was in the bag was the finale. He drew it out and held it up over his head for the cameras, a fat red balloon, swollen and gleaming, sagging with water, held in two hands like a trophy. The crowd nearest the rail understood at once what it was for, and I heard a woman say, sharply, "Don't you dare!" And I heard a man say, "Someone stop him!" And I heard, under all of it, the thin electric silence of 100 people who wanted to intervene and did not know if they were allowed. That is the terrible thing about a crowd. A crowd will let a great deal happen because each person in it is waiting for someone else to be the one to move. I did not wait. But I did not move the way the crowd wanted me to move either. I did not leap the rail and wrestle a 19-year-old to the ground in front of the world, because that is exactly the picture the boy had come to harvest, the guard breaking, the guard undignified, the guard reduced to a bouncer in a fancy coat, and I would not give it to him. And more than that, I did not need to. My part was smaller and colder. I turned my head a few degrees toward the arch, no more than that, and I made the second signal, the closed fist, held for a beat, then opened. Move on my word. And Denby in the shadow brought his hand to his ear. Then the boy threw the balloon, and it burst on Corwin Vale's shoulder, and the water ran down, and Corwin did not move, and the boy laughed his glittering laugh, and for perhaps 3 seconds the boy believed he had won. He had in fact just lost everything, and the machinery of his losing had already engaged, but he stood in the little bright bubble of his triumph and could not feel the floor tilting under him. He spun to the friend. "Did you get it? The water, his face, did you get his face?" He spun back to Corwin, emboldened now, drunk on the not reacting, and he leaned so far over the rope that his feet came off the ground, and he yelled into Corwin's wet, still, forward-facing profile. "You're just gonna *stand there. Seriously. I could do anything right now. I could." He never finished the sentence, and I have always been glad of that, because whatever he was about to say he would have had to live with forever, and it would have been on every screen. Corwin Vale, I will tell you now, did one thing in that whole sequence, and one thing only, and it was not the thing anyone expected, and it was so small that half the cameras missed it. As the water was still running off him before the boy's second lunge, Corwin's right hand, the soaked white glove on the barrel of the rifle, flexed once. The fingers spread and closed. That was all. To the crowd it was nothing, a reflex, a man's hand tightening on a cold, wet grip. To me it was a whole sentence, because it was the sign we teach a guardsman to give when he has taken a deliberate insult, and is telling his sergeant, without a word, without a look, "I am holding. Do what is needed. I will not move first." It is a small covenant between a man and the men who guard the man who guards, and Corwin gave it to me clean and steady with water pouring off his chin, and I have never in 22 years been prouder of a signal so small. I answered it the only way I could. I said, into the low collar microphone that runs under my tunic, in a voice no one in the crowd could hear, "Now." And the machine, which had been turning quietly since 10:30, closed its hand. It did not look like much from the crowd's side, and that is the art of it. There was no rush, no shouting, no drawn weapons, none of the ugly spectacle the boy had come to make. 2 men in plain dark suits, who had been standing among the tourists for 10 minutes looking exactly like tourists, simply arrived at the boy's shoulders. They had been 3 steps away the whole time. One of them said something to him, close and quiet, the way you would tell a man his shoelace was undone, and the boy, still grinning, still high on it, not yet understanding, laughed and said, loud for the phones, What did I do? It's water *, man, it's a joke, chill." That was the last easy breath he took. Because the 2 quiet men did not chill, and they did not argue, and they were not there to have a conversation. One of them took the boy's right wrist. Not roughly, I want that understood, because it matters to everything that came after, and because the boy's own 3 cameras would prove it beyond any doubt. Not roughly, but completely, in the practiced way that a man who has done a thing 10,000 times takes a wrist, so that the arm folds where an arm is meant to fold, and the body follows because it has no other choice. The boy's phone, the ring-lit phone, the phone that was his whole heart, came out of his other hand. A second man simply relieved him of it, plucked it away as easily as taking a toy from a toddler. And the boy's triumph turned, in the space of a single second, into something I can only call disbelief, the wide white look of a young man discovering that the world he thought he understood has rules he never read. "Wait, wait," he said, and now the glitter was gone from his voice and there was only a boy in it. "You can't, I didn't, it's a * joke *." They walked him back off the rail and down, controlled, 1 man at each side, his own body doing most of the work under their guidance, and they took him. Not out of sight. This is the part that mattered. They took him not into some hidden doorway but 3 steps out into the open forecourt margin where every one of the 100 phones could see. And there they held him, calm and immovable, exactly as calm and immovable as the man he had thrown water at. And they waited for the uniformed officers, who were already crossing the square. And the crowd, which had made its strange collective sound when the balloon burst, made a different sound now. It began as scattered clapping. One pair of hands, then three, then a dozen, then a spread of it running through the whole packed forecourt like fire through dry grass, and under the clapping a rising murmur that was not cruel. I listened for cruelty, and there was surprisingly little of it, but was, more than anything, relief. Relief that the thing they had all wanted to happen and had not dared to make happen was happening. Relief that the man who had held so still was not, after all, defenseless. Relief that the world had a floor in it after all. An old man near the west gate raised his cap. The school group, who a moment before had been shrieking with the general excitement, went quiet and stared with the particular gravity of the young watching an adult truthland. And the boy, held now in the open with his empty hands and his emptier face, turned in a slow circle looking for the 400,000 strangers who were supposed to be on his side, and found instead a wall of ordinary people, 100 deep, none of them laughing. I have thought a great deal since, about that turn he made, that slow searching circle, because it was the exact moment the story flipped inside out. He had come to make a video in which the guard was the fool and he was the hero. And a video was made, 3 of them in fact, from 3 angles, his own cameras dutifully catching every frame, but in the video that was made, the fool was him, and the hero was the man who never moved, and the boy had paid for the equipment, staged the shot, hired the angles, and pressed record on his own humiliation. There is a justice in that so clean it almost frightens me. He built the gallows and stood on it and pulled the lever himself, and all we had to do was let him. But I am getting ahead of the morning. The uniformed officers reached him. There were words, the calm official words, the caution, the "you're rights," the "this is not a joke, young man." And the boy's friend with the second phone had by now stopped filming and was standing very still with the look of a person who has just realized he is not a spectator but a participant. And the third one, the one down the rail, had already tried to slip away and been met gently by a fourth quiet man he had never noticed, who had been standing near him the entire time. The whole net, you see, had been drawn before the balloon was ever thrown. That is what the boy could not have known. That is what none of them ever know. They think the forecourt is empty of everything but the one red statue. It is the most watched 100 square yards in the kingdom. Corwin Vale stood through all of it. Dripping, gray-gloved, the water still finding its way down him in slow, cold lines. He stood his post and looked at the far pillar and did not so much as glance at the boy being walked away, because the boy had ceased, the instant the balloon burst, to be any concern of his. That is the discipline the crowd could not see the size of. It is easy to be still when nothing is happening. It is a harder and rarer thing to be still, in soaked and ruined dignity, while the whole square claps for you and a young fool is broken open 20 feet away, and to keep your eyes forward as though none of it touched you, because your post did not end when the water hit you, and your post would not end because the crowd was pleased. Corwin's shift had 3 hours yet to run, and he ran them, wet through, and I will come to that, because it is the truest part of the whole tale. But first I have to tell you about the officer who came to me afterward, and what she said, and how it was that a thing thrown by a 19-year-old for a video became, within a day, a matter that reached rooms in the palace where the king himself is served his morning tea. Because it did reach those rooms. That is the part no one filming that morning could have guessed. They thought they were watching a prank go wrong. They were watching the first minute of something that would climb, floor by floor, all the way to the top of the House of Harrowgate, and would end, I will not pretend otherwise, in a place none of us, not the boy, not the crowd, not even I, would have predicted when the water was still dripping off the muzzle of Corwin Vale's rifle onto the cold gray stone. Let me stay for a moment longer in the forecourt, because the hours after the throw were their own kind of test, harder in some ways than the throw itself. When a thing like that happens, the wrong thing to do, the human thing, the tempting thing, is to make an event of it. To bring the man off his post, dry him, fuss over him, close the forecourt, huddle in the guard hut talking it over. And I understand that instinct. A man has been assaulted, however childishly, and something in you wants to circle him and tend him. But we do not do that, and there is a reason we do not do that, and the reason is the whole meaning of the uniform. The moment we make an event of it, the boy has won after all. The moment the post is broken, the balloon has done its work. So I did not bring Corwin off. I did not so much as walk over to him while the crowd still clapped. I let him stand, wet and steaming faintly in the cool air, and I let the change of watch happen at its appointed time and not 1 minute sooner, because the whole point, the entire point, the point the boy would spend the coming weeks failing to understand, is that the post does not bend. Not for insult, not for injury, not for weather, not for a 19-year-old with a bag of balloons and 400,000 strangers cheering him on. So Corwin Vale stood the next 2 hours and 51 minutes in a sodden tunic, the glove drying stiff and pale on the rifle, the fur of the bearskin dark down one side, and he did his sentry go on the hour exactly as it is written. The slow measured march to the far post and the slow measured march back, heel and toe, the wet wool heavy on him, water squeezing cold from the seams with each step, and coming to the halt with the crack of his heels precise as a clock. And I will tell you what happened in the crowd during those hours, because it was not nothing. They stayed, that is the thing. Ordinarily a crowd on that forecourt turns over every 20 minutes, people come, they film their minute, they move to the next thing. That day they stayed. The people who had seen the throw did not leave, and the people who arrived after heard the story in whispers and stayed too, and by noon the forecourt held 3 times its usual press, all of them there for one reason: to watch a man in a ruined uniform refuse with his whole body to be ruined. Word had gone out, on the very phones the boy had trusted, and it had gone out, to the boy's endless misfortune, not as look at the guard who got soaked, but as look at the guard who would not break. His own clip, uploaded by his own friend before anyone thought better of it, went out into the world and did the exact opposite of what it was made to do. It made Corwin Vale, who did not want to be made into anything, into the most admired man in the kingdom for about a week, and it made the boy into a warning. I watched an old woman work her way to the front of the rail during his 11 o'clock march and stand there with her hand pressed flat to her chest, watching him come and go, and when he halted and faced front she said, to no one, in a voice thick with something older than the morning, "My husband stood a post. 50 years ago. He would have stood it just like that." And she stayed until the change of watch, and when at last Corwin was marched off, relieved, wet through, spine straight, eyes forward, and passed within a yard of her, she did not cheer. She simply inclined her head to him, the small grave bow one soldier's widow gives to a man who has proved the thing her husband lived by. And Corwin, who is not permitted to acknowledge the crowd, who did not turn his head, who did not break stride, Corwin gave her out of the corner of his mouth, so small that I doubt anyone but the two of them and I ever saw it, the ghost of a nod. It was against every rule. It was exactly right. There are 2 or 3 things a man is allowed to break his stillness for if he is the right man, and the grief of a soldier's widow is one of them, and Corwin knew the difference between that and a water balloon as surely as he knew his own name. That is the whole art. Not to be a statue, to know to the inch when to be one and when to be a man. Off the post in the guard room with the door shut, he was allowed at last to be tired. I found him there stripping the sodden tunic, his undershirt clinging to him, his hands, now that no one was watching them, trembling very slightly, not from fear, but from the simple animal cost of 3 hours of holding a body rigid against every instinct it owned. That is the thing the crowd never sees and the boy never dreamed of, what stillness costs. It is not the absence of feeling. It is feeling held down with both hands for hours. Corwin had wanted, in the first hot second after the water hit him, to do exactly what any of us would want to do, to seize the little grinning fool by the collar and ask him what he thought he was playing at. He had wanted it with his whole body. And he had not done it, and the not doing had taken more out of him than an hour of drill. And now, safe behind a shut door, his hands shook with the price of it. He looked up at me and said the first words he had spoken since dawn. "Did I hold, Sergeant?" Not did you see what he did, not is he arrested, not am I famous, only that, did I hold. You held, I said. You held like the pillar you were standing under. He nodded once and looked back down at the ruined tunic in his hands, and I saw his jaw work, and I understood that he was not thinking about the boy at all. He was thinking about the widow. There was a woman, he said, at the rail. She, and he stopped, because it was not a thing he had words for, and I said, I saw her. You did right. And he nodded again, and that was the whole of what passed between us, because we are not a talkative trade, and the things that matter most to us we say in signals and nods and the set of a shoulder, and a man who has understood you does not need it spelled out. But I will tell you the thing I did not say to him in that guard room, because it belongs in this account, and because it is the reason I knew, watching the water burst on his shoulder, exactly what he would do before he did it. I knew it because I had once failed the same test myself, a long time before, when I was young and did not yet understand the weapon I had been given. I was 23, and it was a hot day, and a man at the rail, not a boy with a balloon, a grown man, drunk and mean, had spent an hour trying to make me move, and had at last leaned across and flicked the ash of his cigarette onto my sleeve and laughed. And I had moved. Not much. I had turned my head and I had looked at him, one hard look, 2 seconds, no more, and I had said nothing, done nothing else, and to any ordinary eye it was the smallest thing in the world. But my sergeant, an old hard man named Crail, who is dead now these many years, saw it, and when I came off the post he did not shout at me. He did worse. He sat me down and he said, "You gave it to him. Whatever he came for, you gave it to him. You think you gave him 2 seconds and a look. You gave him the whole thing. You told him, and every man watching, that a guard of this house can be reached, that there's a soft place in him if you dig long enough, and now every fool at that rail knows where to dig." And then he said the thing I have never forgotten, the thing I passed to Corwin word for word 4 years ago in the training yard. "Your stillness isn't a wall they're battering, son. It's a door only you can open, and the whole of your discipline is this, that you decide when it opens, and for whom, and never, ever, that it opens for them. The day you let an insult open it, you've handed the key to the worst man in the square." I never gave it again, not in the long years since. And I taught it to Corwin Vale until it was in his bones, and when the water burst on his shoulder and the boy leaned in howling asterisk, "You're just gonna stand there," I knew, with a certainty that was almost peace, that the door would not open, because I had watched this man hold it shut through worse than a balloon, and because he understood, as I had once not understood, that the not opening was not something done to him. It was the one sovereign thing that was entirely his, the single piece of ground the boy could never take, no matter how far he leaned across the rail. That is what the crowd could not see the size of, and what the boy could not imagine, and what I sat and watched from the shade of the north pillar with my heart very full. A young man in a ruined uniform, keeping the one door shut, and in the keeping of it, winning a fight the fool did not even know he had already lost. Now the officer. Her name was Inspector Halloran, and she came to the guard room an hour after the change of watch, in the plain clothes of her rank, with a slim folder under her arm, and a manner I liked at once because it wasted nothing. She was of that useful age where a person has seen enough to be unimpressed by spectacle, and not yet so senior as to be careless of detail. She sat, she declined tea, she opened her folder, and she told us in order what she had. She had the boy. He was in a cell, calm now, frightened, lawyered, his family had money, it turned out, which is often the way with the ones who behave as though the world is theirs to test. And he was, at that hour, being processed on a straightforward matter of common assault, because that is what throwing a hard-flung object at another human being is, water or no water, joke or no joke, and the law does not find it any less an assault because the object burst. "People think," she said dryly, "that if it doesn't leave a mark it doesn't count. It counts. You may strike a man with a feather. If you meant to strike him, it's a battery. She had the 3 cameras, the boy's own, the friends, the third one's, all of them now evidence, all of them showing, from 3 unimpeachable angles, a young man deliberately hurling a projectile at a stationary uniformed officer of the crown who had given him no provocation whatsoever. "It is," she said, and here she almost smiled, "the most thoroughly self-documented assault I have ever been handed." He filmed his own conviction in high definition, from 3 angles, with good lighting. But that was not why she had come. A common assault does not bring an inspector to a guard room in person with a folder. She had come because of a second thing, and the second thing was the thing that lifted the whole affair off the forecourt and started it up the stairs. "There's a pattern," she said, and laid a printed sheet on the table between us. "Your balloon boy did not wake up yesterday and decide to throw water at a guard. This is a course of conduct." And she walked us through it, and it was uglier than the morning had let on. The boy ran what she called, with distaste, a content channel, a river of videos in which the entire premise, the whole engine of it, the thing his 400,000 strangers paid him attention for, was going to public places and doing things to people who could not, by the rules of their work, respond. He had done it to museum attendants, and to a man playing bagpipes in a square, and to a woman working a ticket booth, and to soldiers standing sentry at a war memorial. That one had made me put the sheet down for a moment, and to a great many others, always the same shape. Find a person whose duty forbids them to react, provoke them past bearing, film their non-reaction, and sell it as courage. He had, the inspector said, built a small fortune on other people's forced patience. And each time he had gotten away with it, the strangers had cheered a little louder, and the swings had grown a little bigger, until they had grown, at last, into a hard-flung balloon at a guard of the king's own house, on the king's own forecourt, in front of the king's own cameras. "So it's not one prank," she said. "It's the last prank in a long line, and everyone before it was a rehearsal for it. And this time he picked the one place in the kingdom where the person he provoked was not, in fact, unable to respond, where the whole apparatus of the crown was standing 3 feet behind the man he threw water at. He thought he'd found the ultimate helpless target. He'd actually found the least helpless one there is." She closed the folder. "I wanted you to know it wasn't random. And I wanted to ask your guardsman something." She turned to Corwin, who had been sitting very straight and very silent through all of it. "Guardsman Vale, in your account, and I'll need it written, but I'll ask it now, did you at any point fear for your safety? Did you believe the object could have been a weapon, or contained anything harmful?" And this is where Corwin Vale did the second remarkable thing of his day, and it is the reason I have come to think of him as the best young man I have ever trained, because he answered the question honestly and against his own interest, in a way that a smaller man would not have. "No, ma'am," he said, "I knew it was water. I could see it was water when he held it up. It was never a danger to my life." He paused. "I want that in the account. I don't want him charged with more than he did. He threw water. He meant it as an insult, not as harm. That's an assault, and it's a disgrace, and he should answer for it. But it wasn't more than that, and I won't have it made more than that on my behalf." The inspector looked at him for a long moment. "Most men in your position," she said slowly, "would take every ounce of what the law would give them." "I'm not most men in my position," Corwin said, without any pride in it, just as a fact. "I'm a guard of the House of Harrowgate. If I let a boy with a balloon turn me into a man who inflates a charge to punish an insult, then he's changed me and I've lost, whatever the court says." He looked down at his hands. "He didn't hurt me. He embarrassed himself. The law can have that. It can't have anything I add to it out of temper. I have served a long time, and I have heard a great many fine words said in guard rooms, most of them nonsense. Those were not nonsense. Inspector Halloran wrote something in her folder, and when she looked up, her whole manner toward Corwin had changed, had gone from professional to something with respect banked in it, and she said, 'I'll put it in exactly as you said it, guardsman, word for word.' And she did, and it turned out to matter more than any of us could have known, because that written account, the guard who refused to inflate the charge, became, when the story climbed the stairs, the very thing that decided how the house would answer. The climb began that same evening, and it began, as these things do now, in the strange, weightless country of the phones. By nightfall the clip had been seen a number of times I do not have the words to make real to you, the sort of number that stops being a count of people and becomes a kind of weather. And it had, as I said, turned inside out. The boy's own 3 cameras, the very instruments of his intended triumph, had been cut together by strangers into 100 versions, and in nearly every one of them the story told was the same. Here is a fool, and here is a man. The wet tunic, the unmoved eyes, the slow flex of the gray glove. And then, cutting to it again and again, as though the world could not get enough of the moment, the 2 quiet men arriving at the boy's shoulders out of a crowd he had thought was his audience, and the wide white disbelief on his face as the ground he had walked in on opened under his feet. I am told there is a particular cruelty in that machine, the way it can turn on a person, and I do not doubt it, and I want to be careful here, because a boy of 19 is a boy of 19 even when he has behaved like a monument to selfishness, and the sight of half the world laughing at him was, I have no doubt, a genuine agony. I did not enjoy it, but I will tell you the plain truth of what I felt, watching it spread. I felt that a thing had been set right that had been wrong for a long time. Not the boy's ruin, I took no pleasure in that, but the shape of the thing. For years he had grown rich on the forced patience of people who could not answer him, and had taught 400,000 strangers that a person's inability to strike back was an invitation to strike them. And now, all at once, every one of those strangers had watched the arithmetic reverse, had watched a man who could not answer be answered asterisk for completely by the quiet order that surrounded him, and had understood, in a way no lecture could ever have taught them, that the forced patience of a disciplined man is not weakness but a kind of banked strength, and that the world does, after all, keep an account. The palace, of course, does not live in that weather. The palace moves slower and colder and by other rules, and the story reached it not through the phones but through the ordinary channels, a report to the master of the household, a note to the officer commanding the guard, and because of what the boy's channel turned out to be, a matter passed up to the desk of Princess Adela, who among her many duties holds a particular care for the dignity and welfare of those who serve the house. It was Princess Adela who read Inspector Halloran's account. It was Princess Adela who read the line where a wet, humiliated young guardsman had refused to let the charge against his tormentor be inflated by so much as a hair. And it was Princess Adela, I would learn, who set down that account and said to the officer who had brought it, a single sentence that decided everything that followed. Then we shall be exactly as fair to the boy as the man he insulted was. Not 1 grain more and not 1 grain less. But that is to leap ahead, and I said I would not leap. Let me tell you about the false hope that came first, and how close the whole thing came to going wrong, because it did come close, and the man who nearly wrecked it was not the boy. It was the boy's father. He arrived at the police station that evening, and he arrived the way the fathers of such boys often arrive, not chastened, not grieved, but affronted, as though the great inconvenience of the day was that anyone had dared to lay hands on his son. He was a man of means, as I have said, the kind of means that has always, in his experience, been able to make an unpleasant thing go away, and he came armed with a lawyer and a manner and a deep, unexamined certainty that this too could be smoothed over with the right words to the right people. And for a day or so, I will confess, it looked as though he might be right, and those were bad hours for all of us who wanted to see the thing done cleanly, because the father did not want it done cleanly. He wanted it done quietly, which is a different thing, and often the enemy of it. His argument, made loudly and in several rooms, ran like this: it was only water. No one was hurt. The boy was young and foolish and had learned his lesson. The whole matter was being blown out of all proportion by a hysterical public and a vindictive palace, and the honorable thing, the reasonable thing, was for everyone to step back, drop the charge, Accept a private apology and perhaps a generous donation to some suitable charity of the guard's choosing, and let a young man's future not be destroyed over a prank. And he said this last part often, and he said it well, and I want to tell you why it was so dangerous, because it is the exact shape of the reasonable-sounding wrong thing, the middle road that tempts everyone in a story like this, and it very nearly worked. It was dangerous because it was half true. The boy asterisk was asterisk young. It was only water. His future asterisk could asterisk be badly damaged. A reasonable person hearing only those things might well think, yes, let it go, why ruin a life over a balloon? And I felt the pull of it myself, if I am honest, the pull of the merciful-seeming thing, the not wanting to be the hard men who broke a foolish boy. That pull is real, and it is not shameful to feel it. But it was wrong, and here is why it was wrong, and it took me a night's thinking to put it into words that I trusted. The father's road was not mercy. It was privilege wearing mercy's coat. Because the let it go he asked for was a thing available only to a boy with a rich father, a quiet payment, a private word, a charge that melted away, and it was the very same machine that had made the boy what he was in the first place. He had spent 19 years learning that consequences were things that happened to other people, that a man of his means and his means' son could always, at the last moment, buy the ground back under his feet. And if we let the father buy it back one more time, we would not be showing the boy mercy. We would be teaching him, one final and permanent time, the exact lesson that had brought him to a cell, that there is no floor, that he can do anything, that someone will always make it go away. The mercy the boy actually needed, the only mercy that could ever change him, was to discover once cleanly that there was a floor after all, and that it did not move for money any more than Corwin Vale had moved for water. And the strange thing, the thing I did not expect, is that the palace saw this more clearly than anyone, and saw it fast, and it was Corwin's own written account that let them see it. Because when the father's lawyer, growing bolder, made the offer formally, the private apology, the charitable donation, the quiet dropping of the matter, the answer came back not from the police, and not from a court, but from the desk of Princess Adela, and it was, I am told, very short. It thanked the family for their willingness to make amends. It observed that Guardsman Vale had already, and unprompted, insisted that the young man be charged with nothing beyond what he had actually done. No inflation, no vengeance, the plain assault and no more. And it concluded that since the guard who had been wronged had asked for exact justice, and not one grain more, the house could hardly do the young man the disservice of giving him less. The guardsman has been more merciful to your son than you are asking us to be. The note said, I have seen the words, for true mercy corrects, and what you propose would only postpone. Your son will answer for what he did in the ordinary way, before the ordinary law, exactly as any other person would. That is the fairness the guardsman himself requested, and we will not be less fair than the man who was insulted. The father did not understand it. I do not think he ever understood it. He had come expecting to negotiate the size of the escape, and he had been told, courteously and immovably, that there was no escape to negotiate, not because the house was vengeful, but because the house was asterisk fair, asterisk and fairness, applied without fear or favor to a boy who had never once met it, felt to that family exactly like cruelty. That is the tell always of a person raised without a floor. They cannot tell justice from persecution, because they have never in their lives felt the one, and so they name it the other. So the middle road closed. The quiet payment did not happen. And the boy, stripped now of the certainty that his father could make the world go soft again, sat in the ordinary machinery of the ordinary law and began, for the first time in his life, to feel the actual weight of a thing he had done. That should have been the end of it, and in the strict legal sense it very nearly was. The matter was set for a hearing. The evidence was, as the inspector had said, the most complete she had ever handled. There was, in truth, nothing left to determine except the sentence, and the sentence for a first common assault of that kind is not a heavy one, a fine, some hours of service to the community, a mark on a record that would follow him a while and then fade. That was where it was all headed, cleanly and correctly, and had it gone only there, I would still be telling you a good story, the story of a fool who met the floor. But it did not go only there, because the House of Harrowgate did one more thing, one last unexpected thing, and it was the truest and the strangest and, to me, the most moving turn of the whole affair, and it happened because of a question the princess asked that no one had thought to ask. She asked what the boy should have to look at. Here is what she meant, and how it was told to me. When the matter of the community service came up, the hours the court would set the boy to work as part of his answer. The ordinary course would have sent him to sweep a park, or paint a fence, or sort donations in some warehouse, the anonymous busy work that such sentences usually are, a thing done to fill hours and touch nothing. And Princess Adela, reading the file again, reading the long list of the boy's earlier content, the museum attendant, the bagpiper, the ticket booth woman, the sentries at the war memorial, set it down and said, this young man's whole trade was to stand in front of people who serve and mock them for not being able to answer. He has never once in his life had to be one of them. So let his service be to stand where they stand. Let him learn the weight of the thing he laughed at, not as a punishment, as an education. And so it was arranged, quietly, lawfully, with the boy's own consent as part of his sentence, because a thing like this cannot be forced and is worthless if it is, that a portion of his hours of service would be spent not sweeping a park, but standing, in plain clothes, under supervision, on the public margin of a working post, doing the one thing his whole life had trained him to be incapable of. Being still, being patient, being present at the service of others without a camera, without an audience, without a swing to take. He would not stand a guard's post, that he had not earned and never would, but he would stand near *1. He would spend his hours in the presence of the thing he had thrown water at, and he would be made, at last, to hold. They gave him to Corwin. I do not know whose idea that last part was, the princess's, or the commanding officer's, or perhaps it simply fell out that way because it was Corwin's post the boy had fouled, and so it was Corwin's post the boy would repair. But I know that when it was put to Corwin Vale, he was silent for a while, and then he said only, if it will do him any good, Sergeant, I'll take him. And I said, it may do him none. He may sneer through the whole of it. And Corwin said, then it'll do him none, and I'll have lost nothing. But he might not sneer. A man's different when there's no camera on him. Sometimes there's a person under all that, and so it was said. I was there the first morning. I would not have missed it. The boy came up the approach road in the gray light with a supervising officer, and he did not look like the boy in the clip. That boy had been all glitter and swing and forward motion. This one came slowly, with his shoulders up around his ears, in plain dark clothes with no ring light and no phone. The phone especially, he had had to surrender it for the duration of his hours, and I have never seen a young man so naked as that one was without it, his hands not knowing what to do with themselves, reaching 100 times a morning for a thing that was not there. He was brought to the margin of the forecourt, to a marked spot 10 feet from where Corwin stood his post, and he was told simply that he would remain there, still and quiet and orderly for the duration, that he would not speak to the public, that he would not speak to the guard, that he was there to observe and to hold and nothing more. And then he had to do it, and that, it turned out, was the whole education, and it was more terrible to him than any fine or any cell, because it asked of him the one thing he had never in his life given, nothing, to stand and do nothing, to be looked at and not perform, to have hours pass with no reward, no number ticking upward, no stranger's attention, no swing. Within 20 minutes he was shifting foot to foot. Within an hour I could see the strain of it on him, the same strain, though he could not have known it, that the stillness costs a real guard, the feeling held down with both hands, except that Corwin held down a soldier's discipline, and the boy was holding down nothing but his own bottomless need to be seen. By the third hour of the first day he looked wrung out, gray, older. He had discovered the floor. He had discovered, standing 10 feet from a man who did it 8 hours a day without complaint, exactly how heavy the thing was that he had spent years mocking people for carrying. Corwin never once looked at him. That was the discipline of it, and it was the kindness of it too, though the boy could not have understood that at first. Corwin did not lecture him, did not glare at him, did not perform for him the triumph of the wronged. He simply stood his post, magnificent and indifferent, and let the post itself be the teacher. And the post is a patient teacher and a thorough one. It teaches by weight. It teaches by hours. It teaches a man, without a single word, exactly what he is made of. And the boy, who had believed, I think, that he was made of cleverness and courage, began to learn, 10 feet from Corwin Vale, that he was made mostly of hunger, and that the hunger was not the same thing as strength, and had never been. The change did not come all at once. I want to be honest about that, because the easy version of this story would have the boy weeping and reformed by the second afternoon, and life is not so tidy. For the first several days he was merely miserable and resentful, doing his hours because he was made to, counting them down, hating everyone. But something began to shift, and I marked the day it started, because it started with a small thing that had nothing to do with him. It was a wet morning and the forecourt was thin of crowds, and an old man came alone to the rail, one of the regulars, a stooped man with a cane and a row of faded ribbons on his coat, who came once a month and stood a while and went away. He was a veteran. I had known him for years. He did not make a fuss. He came to the rail and he stood in the drizzle, and he looked at Corwin with the particular stillness of a man remembering, and he raised one unsteady hand, slowly, and held it at the brim of his cap in a salute that took him a great effort to hold level. And Corwin, without breaking his post, without turning his head, in the small permitted way that a guard may answer such a thing, brought his own hand from the rifle in the guardsman's slow present, held it, and returned the old man's salute, soldier to soldier, across the rail and the years. The boy saw it. He was 10 feet away and he saw the whole of it, the old man's effort, the guard's grave answer, the two of them holding the salute in the rain with the drizzle coming down, and I was watching the boy's face and I saw something cross it that I had not seen there before, and it was not resentment and it was not misery. It was something more like grief, or shame, or the beginning of understanding, which is often the same thing wearing 3 faces. Because the boy had once done a video, the inspector's list had it, at a war memorial, mocking men exactly like this old man for standing exactly this still. And now, he was watching what that stillness actually held, watching 2 soldiers honor each other across a rail with more feeling in one unbroken salute than the boy had ever manufactured in 400,000 strangers' worth of noise, and I think it was in that moment. Watching a thing he had once mocked reveal itself as the most human thing on the forecourt, that the floor the boy had discovered turned, under his feet, into something he could stand on. He finished his hours, all of them. He did not sneer through them as I had feared he might. Somewhere in the middle of them, he stopped counting them down and started, simply, standing them, and the difference was visible, the way it is always visible when a man stops enduring a thing and starts inhabiting it. On his last morning he did his hours as steadily as I have seen anyone not of the trade do them, and when they were over and the supervising officer came to release him, the boy did a thing that no one had asked of him and no sentence required. He asked to speak to Corwin. It was against the rules of his service, and the officer looked to me, and I looked at Corwin, who had of course heard, and Corwin, his shift not yet ended, his eyes forward, immaculate as ever, gave the smallest nod. So the boy was allowed to cross to the edge of the post, and he stood before the man he had thrown water at 8 weeks before, and for a long moment he could not find any words at all, this boy who had built a fortune out of never being at a loss for words. And then he found some, and they were plain, and they were, I think, the first entirely true thing he had said in front of another person in years. "I'm sorry," he said, "not because they made me. I'm sorry because I finally get it." He swallowed. "I thought you couldn't do anything. That was the whole reason I picked you. I thought you were the one person in the world who couldn't do anything back." He looked down. "And it turned out you were the only one who could do the one thing that actually—" He stopped. "You didn't move. Everybody moves. Everybody I ever filmed, I could always make them move, make them react, make them small, and then I'd win. And you just didn't. You didn't give me anything to win against. And I stood here for 8 weeks trying to do what you do for one morning, and I couldn't do it for an hour." He met Corwin's eyes then, though Corwin stayed level and forward, and he said, "I don't know how you carry it. I really don't. I'm sorry I laughed at it. I'm sorry I laughed at all of them." And Corwin Vale, who is not permitted to speak on his post, who had held his silence through a thrown balloon and 8 weeks of a boy's misery and a whole nation's noise, did the last remarkable thing, and it was the smallest and the largest of them all. He did not speak. He did not break his post even then, but he brought his gray-gloved right hand, the same hand the water had soaked 8 weeks before, from the barrel of the rifle, and he held it out level at his side, low, where only the boy could see it. And the boy, understanding, took it, and they shook hands once, the guard and the fool in silence at the edge of the post, and then the boy stepped back, and Corwin's hand returned to the rifle, and his eyes never left the far pillar, and it was as though nothing had happened at all except that everything had. I have carried this story a good while now, and told it more than once, and people always want to know what became of them afterward, the boy, the guard, the whole affair, as though a tale is not finished until you have followed each thread out to its end. So let me do that, and then I will say the one thing I have learned from it and let you go. The boy did not return to his old trade. I will not tell you he became a saint, because he did not, and I would not believe it of anyone, and neither should you. But the river of videos stopped. The museum attendants and the buskers and the sentries were troubled by him no more. And after a time, a different kind of thing began to appear under his name, quieter, smaller, less rewarded by the strangers, and it was, of all things, about the people he had once mocked. He went back to the war memorial, the one on his old list, and this time he did not stand in front of the sentries. He stood beside them at a proper distance, and he simply told, plainly and without cleverness, what he had learned about what it costs to stand still in service of something larger than yourself. Fewer strangers watched it. That, I think, was rather the point. He had spent his youth learning that attention was the only thing worth having, and he had been made, at the edge of a guard's post in the rain, to unlearn it. And a man who has unlearned that is worth 10 of the boy who threw the balloon, and no court sentence could ever have bought that. Only the floor could. Only the weight of the thing itself, and the 8 weeks of holding it, and the salute in the rain that he was never meant to see, and that changed him more than anything anyone said to him. His father never understood any of it, and I have made my peace with that. Some men cannot be taught the floor because they have arranged their whole lives so as never to touch it, and there is nothing to be done for such men but to decline, courteously and immovably, to let them buy the ground back for their sons. The house declined. That was the whole of the mercy, and it was a real mercy, though it wore the face of hardness, and the proof that it was mercy is standing at a war memorial now, at a proper distance, telling the truth. As for Inspector Halloran, she sent up her final report, and in it, I have this on good authority, she wrote a closing line that had nothing to do with the law and that I have never forgotten. She wrote, "The complainant guardsman requested exact justice for a man who had shown him none, and in doing so administered a harsher and truer sentence than any this court could impose. I recommend the matter close," and it closed. And as for Corwin Vale, the house did not forget him, though he wished, in his soldier's way, that it would. He did not want a medal for standing still under a balloon. He thought and said that a man should not be decorated for merely doing his post, and there is a hard truth in that which I respect. But Princess Adela is wiser than a young man's modesty, and she understood that what Corwin had done was not merely to stand still. Any statue can stand still. but to hold the whole meaning of the uniform intact under an insult designed to strip it away, and then to insist, wet and humiliated, on exact fairness for the boy who stripped it, and then to spend 8 weeks patiently making a man out of that same boy without a word of reproach. That is not a thing you let pass. So there was no parade at Corwin's own request, but there was a quiet audience, one afternoon in a room the public never sees, and in it Princess Adela said to him, on behalf of the king her brother, a few words that I was privileged to hear, because Corwin asked that his old sergeant stand with him, and I stood with him. She said, Guardsman Vale, you were struck and you did not strike back, and the whole kingdom saw the strength in that. But that is not why I sent for you. Any well-trained man might have held. I sent for you because when the law offered you your enemy's neck, you asked for nothing but fairness, and then you spent 2 months of patience teaching him to be worth the fairness you asked. The first was discipline. The second was character. The house can train the first into a man. The second a man brings himself, or he does not have it at all. You have it. It is rarer than courage and worth more, and it is the reason this house still means what it is meant to mean. On behalf of the king, thank you. And she inclined her head to him, a princess of the House of Harrowgate, bowing her head a fraction to a guardsman, and Corwin, who had held his post through a thrown balloon and a nation's noise, went very still, and then bowed his own head far lower, and neither of them said anything more, because there was nothing more that words could do. We walked out of that room together, the two of us, back toward the forecourt in the ordinary afternoon, and Corwin was quiet a long while, and then he said, It was only water, Sergeant, in the end, it was only ever water. And I said, It was never the water, lad, it was never once about the water. And he nodded because of course he knew that, he had known it from the first cold second it burst on his shoulder. He had only needed, the way we all do, to hear another man say it aloud. So here is the one thing I have learned, and then I am done. The boy threw the balloon because he believed he had found the perfect victim, a man forbidden to react, a strength he mistook for helplessness, a silence he mistook for surrender. And in a way, he was right about the silence and wrong about everything it meant. Because the discipline that keeps a guard from lifting his hand against a fool is the very same discipline that surrounds that guard with a whole quiet order of men who will answer, lawfully and completely on his behalf. And the patience that lets a man stand wet and mocked without breaking is the very same patience that can, given 8 weeks and no camera, remake the very fool who mocked him. The stillness is not the absence of power. The stillness is the power, banked, ruled, held in reserve, released only through the right channels and never in temper. And the tragedy of every arrogant man who has ever tested a disciplined one is that he cannot tell the difference until the ground has already opened under his feet. The boy learned the difference. It cost him everything he thought he was and gave him back something better, and he paid the price in 8 weeks of holding a stillness he'd have sworn no reward could make him keep. He kept it for no reward at all. That is where a man is made, not under the cameras, but exactly where there are none. Corwin Vale still stands his post. If you go to the forecourt on a bright ordinary morning, you may see him there, red tunic, black bearskin, white gloves, eyes forward, immovable, and you would never guess, to look at him, that a boy once threw water at that shoulder in front of the watching world and got, in return, not the reaction he came for, but a lesson that reached all the way up to the top of the house and all the way down into the bottom of himself. You would see only a still man in a red coat. That is the whole of it, and it is enough. The stillness holds. It always did. It was only ever the fools who thought it was empty.